And aloha! Welcome to the Blue Note Fan Report. I'm Guy, the Hawaii Blues fan, and I'm your host on the only program that is by a fan, for the fan, and absolutely about you, the fan.
So are you Guy or D?
Today, I think we could have gone with the Blue Note Fan Report. I have got a special guest. I was doing some working around on Twitter a couple days ago, and on January 6th, that was the 50th anniversary of the melee in Philly, the fight. And I found out from Hockey History Twitter, they had kind of said that Andy Mohler, works for KSDK, had produced a segment for Sports Plus. I went and found it and watched it, and then I reached out to Andy, and Andy's going to join us here in just a second. First, let's take a look at this Sports Plus with Andy Mohler. Well, actually, he's not in it. He produced it. Make sure I get that right. So here we go. Here is the Sports Plus on the Brawl.
The wildest night in St. Louis Blues history happened 50 years ago this week. It was the Blues against the Philadelphia Police, and as one officer boasted that night, the police were winning. This one clip in slow motion was all we had of that night until a recent discovery in the Channel 5 basement.
Sports Plus Spotlight.
I got to give Andy credit for going through and finding this footage. This footage
We'll have
is
more
great.
pregame information in just a minute. This is St. Louis Blues hockey.
And the St. Louis Blues were struggling. Coach Bill McCreary was fired on Christmas Day with Al Arbor taking over, and they were in last place in their division.
Who loses his stick but goes in and kicks the puck. I've never seen that in hockey.
The previous night, they lost 9-1 in New York to the Rangers, and things weren't going any better at the Spectrum in Philadelphia.
Here's the shot, they score! Jimmy Johnson from the faceoff. Fires it in, the Blues are arguing.
I turn like this.
Our buddy Gary
Talk to my winger. I think Mike Murphy was my winger at the time. Came back like this before I even put the stick down. He dropped the puck.
Arbor out at the blue line talking to referee John Ashley.
The period ended 2 minutes later, but the coach was still furious the goal was allowed to stand. We talked with 3 players on the ice that night: center Gary Unger, winger Phil Roberto, winger Floyd Thompson, and beat writer Gary Miller, covering the game for the Post-Dispatch.
So it's 2-0. Now some of the fans get into it. Bob Flegger. Now there's a fan down in the stands. Or is that a policeman without his hat? Arbor and the Blues coach and the policeman start to push and shove, and everybody is into it.
Al followed those guys down to the Zamboni. The police had billy clubs, and they whacked Al on the head.
Al was on his knees. I saw policeman hit him over the head with the billy.
You did actually see the policeman give him the nightstick.
I was 10 feet from Al when it happened.
I love that man. I thought he was a great coach. Yeah, you know, I would have died for him on the ice like most of the guys would have. The officer hit him over the head with a nightstick. So I grabbed the officer in a chokehold from behind and pulled him off Al because he was going to hit him again.
The chaos continued with the police while fans continued to throw debris at the Blues players, and they retaliated.
And now the players are really throwing their sticks up in the air.
This is getting very serious now.
Yes, it is.
This is getting very serious.
Al Arbor needed stitches for a gash on his head.
He's okay, though, Claire. I know you'll be worried.
Number 24, John Arbor, no relation, had been called up from the minors that day. He also needed stitches for a head wound. The third period was delayed because the Blues players all had to have their skates resharpened.
At that point,
that's just so funny.
Police said the entire Blues team was under arrest. And They wanted to haul them all off to jail right then.
That's like, this is ridiculous. You're not throwing my players in jail. That's my players are going back to the dressing room. We got a game to play here.
It was 2-0 when we started the third period. We beat them 3-2. Nobody was going to stop us then. We had an ugly on.
We were not going to lose that game. We just decided in our brain that we weren't going to lose that game.
After the game, the police were back, loading Al and John Arbor, Phil Roberto, and Floyd Thompson into a paddy wagon. Blues owner Sid Solomon Jr. was on the trip. He and reporter Miller were right behind. At 5 a.m., the coach and his players went in front of a judge.
Mr. Solomon, oh, he was livid about how they were handling us. And what a great man Mr. Solomon was to stick up like that for his players.
The funniest part of the hearing that I remember was the judge asking, I forgot who went first, I think Floyd Thompson, what is your address? And he gave the address of the arena in St. Louis.
All three of them, they asked him where you live. 5700 Oakland. Is that where you live? No, that's where I get my mail. And the next guy, where do you live? 5700.
The four were released on $500 bond and told to return for a hearing in a month. Mr. Solomon promised legal action of his own.
What our action is going to be, I couldn't tell you this time, but our promise is it won't be the kind of action that's passive, because we don't feel that way about it at all. We were not treated the way people would have been treated in St. Louis under the same circumstances.
Arbor and his players got back to the hotel in time to rejoin the team for the flight home. They had a hearing with league president Clarence Campbell that summer, but all criminal charges were dropped.
If we ended up had a criminal record against us, we might not have been able to play hockey again in the United States. So that was a big relief when that was over.
It kind of reminded me of that hockey's a little bit of a crazy game. Anything can happen. As a young guy, you're looking for excitement. So we were right in the middle of it, and it was fun.
First of all, I got to tell Andy, well done. That was very well done. I thank you so much, man. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. And my co-host, Ashley Slapshot Jones, is with us. Again, that was very, very well done. I don't live in St. Louis anymore. I live in Hawaii. But for me to see that and see the old style, what I remember watching as a kid, really good job, man.
I appreciate that. It was a lot of fun to put together. Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sure. How much time did you take to put that together? Because I know Gary was in town about a week earlier at the awards, right?
That's right. Frank interviewed him then. I gave Frank a list of questions, and he said Gary answered them all after the first, just the first question. He answered everything I'd asked there, so he asked some additional questions, and I was able to connect with Floyd Thompson, and he was great. He was really nice, and he said, "Hey, now do you want to talk to Phil Roberto?" And yeah, absolutely, I would. So he put me in contact with Phil Roberto, and Gary Miller, who was the Blues beat writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for about 13 years, I had connected with a few years earlier when I did a 2-hour-long specials on the Blues history for Channel 5. I connected with him again because he gave me the classic story. Excuse me while I get rid of this frog in my throat.
Oh, no problem, sir.
Anyway, Gary said that he had snuck back. Gary Miller, that is, had snuck around the back end to get out to the where all the fracas was going on, and he encountered a police officer who wouldn't let him go any further. And so Gary asked him, "Now, what is going on out there?" And he said, "Well, right now it's the St. Louis Blues against the Philadelphia Police, and we're winning." And so Gary Miller said, "Excuse me, can I get your name, please?" No, he wouldn't give him his name, but Gary managed to write down his badge number. And so when that came up, as far as when the players were going to be charged, That was one big reason why it never went any further than that, because the police basically admitted that they'd staged a whooping on this hockey team.
Yeah, that they did it on purpose. They took the moment. And now, for me, I don't think a lot of people realize how important that fight is, right? That fight.
Yeah, well, you never see anything like that anymore. And I can only think of one other instance in the NHL history, as long as I've been alive, where the Bruins went up in the stands. Mike Milbury, I think, was one right at the forefront of it at Madison Square Garden, and that was, I think, in the late 70s.
Right. Well, what I'm getting at was the Philadelphia owner was so upset with the Blues winning that game. He comes back and he makes the quote, "We are never going to lose like that again. We are never going to get out-muscled. We're never going to get outworked. We're never going to get outbeat, outfought." And that's the beginning of the Broad Street Bullies.
Right. And one of the players for the Blues that night, Andre DuPont, better known as Moose DuPont, number 6 in your program, number 1 in your hearts, eventually got traded to Philadelphia, and he became one of those Broad Street Bullies.
Yeah. Well, not only that. So you get the Broad Street Bullies. Up until this point, none of the expansion teams had won a cup, right?
That is correct.
So Philly changes their style of play, puts all these, for lack of a better word, goons on the ice, out-muscles, beats up every team every night, and ends up winning 2 Stanley Cups and goes to 3. And this starts what ends up, so you have Montreal that wins a couple after that, but then you have the Islanders winning, then the Edmonton Oilers winning. It starts this cycle of the original 6 not being the original 6 anymore. They weren't the powerhouses anymore. The expansion teams were becoming the powerhouse. Edmonton Oilers, you had Pittsburgh get in there. All those things that happened, I think it's because of that fight.
You could certainly make a case for that. And the Blues and the Flyers had a history for, going back to their first season when they both came in. The Blues and the Flyers wound up playing in the first round of the playoffs. And in one of the games in Philadelphia, Noel Picard basically beat up one of the Flyers' better players. Name escapes me off the top of my head, but and the Blues ended up winning the series. And so it took about 3 or 4 years before Ed Snyder got angry enough that he said, "Well, we're gonna stop this right now." Little known fact, if you want, the Blues did win that night in Philadelphia. They didn't win again in Philadelphia until 1987, which happened to be the last road game Dan Kelly did as the Blues broadcaster.
Wow, that's oh man. I love history. I love it. I love dissecting it. I love taking it apart. Me and Ashley have talked history for a while now, and she's always like, she started following the team when Gretzky came in. I'm a little bit older, started following him in the 70s. So I know this. I know this game, or at least have a recollection of it. I was probably 7 or 8 now, actually a little younger than that. But I have enough recollection of what had happened to know it. And then I've had Gary on enough times. Gary will proudly say, "I started that fight."
Well, he could certainly make a claim for that, because he was in the face-off circle when the linesman, apparently, even the broadcast, the Doug Favell, the Flyers goalie that night, as you saw a little bit of in that piece, he was taunting the Blues bench, kind of showed him his backside and whatever. And they was going back and forth with the Blues bench, and all of a sudden you hear Dan Kelly say, basically, he scores, and the director cuts just in time to see a flash of the defenseman for the Flyers, Jim Johnson, score that goal, which Gary claimed the linesman dropped the puck unfairly.
Yeah,
set the whole thing in motion.
Yeah, he talks about, well, not only that, see, a lot of people don't know this. This is a little known fact about that fight. That fight is immortalized in Slapshot. That the fight scene in Slapshot is based on the fight in Philadelphia. Right?
You know, it's been a while since I've seen Slapshot, so I'm going to have to go back and check that out.
The keys getting chucked. The keys getting chucked. They always talk about someone chucking keys, and you know, the fight and wanting to take everybody to jail. You know, take everyone to jail. That was the writer. I had the guy that played the goalie on, and he kind of talked about the writer, how she was writing about her brother being in the minor leagues. And that was, you know, he didn't really know about that. But when you look at it, there's no way you can watch this that came out in 76, 77 and think that fight's not the same thing, right?
Well, that's true. Yeah, because it was a few years before that Bruins-Rangers fight at Madison, or Bruins going up into the stands at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, sure. That would certainly make sense.
Well, then there's also other St. Louis things that are in that movie. At one point, they're wearing a Cardinal hat. At another point, there's a Blues poster in either his apartment or the locker room. Right. So there's connections.
Apartment, I think that's right.
Apartments. Yes. So when you add all of that up, you go, you know, it's what do they say when it's not circumstantial evidence, but it's pretty good circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ashley, I know I'm talking too much. You got a question for our guest there?
No, I enjoy listening. You have more history knowledge than I do. I moved to St. Louis when I was 10, so I became a fan in 95 when Gretzky came, so he has better history questions.
Let's talk about Gretzky coming to St. Louis.
Okay.
When Gretzky comes to St. Louis, Hull saved hockey in St. Louis. Gretzky elevated it. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with me there, Andy?
I think that's a fair point. It certainly was. I mean, it was the lead story, obviously, for several days, even before the trade was made. And when they actually did make the trade, which they announced out in Los Angeles, the next day they went to practice in Vancouver. I think they had a day off practice before they played the Canucks 2 nights after the trade. And so we sent Frank Cusimano and a photographer out to Vancouver, and he gets there just in time for the Blues to show up. And the players are all getting off the bus, and it literally looked like the fans were 20 deep there at the entrance to the Vancouver practice facility waiting for the Blues to come in. Brett Hull walks by. He looks at our camera and he goes, "You think we traded for Wayne Gretzky or something?"
I remember the night. I was active duty Navy. I was I was stationed in Chicago, north of Chicago, at a base up there, and I remember I can't think of his name now. The guy for ESPN. He was like their main guy, Chris Berman. Like he came on the show that night, and the first thing he says, "Well, the only way you were going to get me on the show was if they traded Gretzky." Because he had retired. He was only doing the NFL now. He wasn't doing Sports Center. So that was interesting. What are some of your memories of Blues history? What are some of the things that stand out to you as the little known things that make this team tick?
Well, I can tell you that my first recollections of the Blues, I was probably, 5 or 6 years old or whatever. And the way our living room was set up, we had a couple of easy chairs or whatever, but there was enough of a space behind one of the easy chairs before you get to the wall in the room, and I would pretend that I was going back behind the net there. So I remember watching Dan Kelly do the games on KPLR. You may have noticed in the piece there, Gus Kyle was wearing a blazer with a Falstaff patch on it, which of course was the sponsor long time for the Blues broadcasts. But I remember the Bobby Orr goal being scored, and I grew up with a circle of friends where, whatever season it was, that was the sport that we followed. And so, whenever it was hockey season, I was all in. I still have pretty good collection of hockey cards that I collected back when I was a preteen and such and such. So I remember finding out Red Berenson getting traded for Gary Younger, and reading the newspaper the next day. So yeah, my history goes back pretty far with them. And so, yeah, like most Blues fans, I've lived and died with them quite a few times until they finally won the Cup in 2019.
Yeah, you're not the only one. So being connected like you were with the team through KSDK and getting to really, you were able to be deep in that season, right?
In the Gretzky season? Yeah.
The 19 season.
Oh yes, absolutely, sure.
Right,
yes.
the 2019 18-19 season.
Yes, there were only a couple of us. One being me that got left behind, and we sent a small army to follow them in Boston for the finals games there, and yes, we were all in on Blues coverage that year.
Yeah, absolutely, I know. But for you personally, for you with your connection and all of that, what is the moment in 19 where you went, aha?
Well, it'd be quick to say that that it might have been that comeback game in Winnipeg in the very first round, when they, I think, they came back a couple of times and knocked off the Jets. And I can remember thinking that, this we've got a pretty good chance here. The Pat Maroon goal, of course, to get us into the next round, was unbelievable. And then, the San Jose had knocked us out in 2015, which I thought we had a really good team that year. And so, that was a little bit nerve-wracking, but once they came back after the Timo Meier throwing the puck into the net, I was pretty confident that they'd be able to somehow go on and win it all from there.
Yeah, for me, actually, and I've talked about this before, and I want to know what you think. I think for me, my aha moment was the Tampa Bay game when they went 1-0 in overtime. And I think it was Bennington's third shutout, and it was right in the beginning of the 11-game win streak. It's like you could see that team. To me, you could see that team start believing in themselves a lot more than any other time. And as those wins started clicking off, you just go back to that moment and you go, "Wow, that's where it happened." At least for me.
I don't disagree. And of course, while we started off talking about the Blues and the Flyers, wasn't Bennington's first win? Wasn't that in a game against the
Flyers?
Flyers,
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a good little history with them.
Yes, we do. I guess I've been bitten enough times as a Blues fan over the years. I have my badge of courage for rooting for this franchise that I wasn't really ready to say, okay, we could win the Cup until we at least got to the playoffs. Yeah. Certainly remember Grant Fuhr in the first game of the series against Toronto in '96 or whatever that that dashed a lot of hopes at that point.
Oh yeah. Needless to say.
Yeah, personally, I kind of needed to get into the playoffs before I could truly say, okay, I'm on the bandwagon now.
Got a question for you from one of our listeners. Chris Lambert wants to know, which goalie on the Blues do you think is the greatest of all time?
Well, it'd be hard to say that Glenn Hall was not the greatest goalie in Blues history. Now he was 38, I think, playing with the Blues at that point, but he was phenomenal, and he had a great defense playing in front of him. Mike Liut could come up with some incredibly spectacular saves, but that, of course, was in a much more offensive-minded era. He finished a few votes behind Wayne Gretzky for the MVP in 80-81 with a 3.34 goals against average. If you have a 3.34 goals against average, they're going to send you off to play in your beer league these days. But it was a much different time.
I agree.
So, certainly, Curtis Joseph Boy, that was back in the day when, the opposing team pretty much had a free lane to the goal, because he was facing 50 and 55 shots a night. It seemed like, and he was spectacular. But I'd have to go back and say Glenn Hall was probably the greatest I saw anyway.
Yeah, well, for me, I'm with you with Glenn Hall. I put Glenn Hall number one, and it's the fact that he won the Conn Smythe on a team that lost all 4 games at the age, I think it was 37 or 38, right around there at that time.
Right.
Yeah, that just didn't happen back then.
No, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but he may be he was certainly the first anyway, Conn Smythe winner to come from the losing team. And that's
He
still
was the first.
case.
I want to say now there's 6 of them.
Okay.
The majority of them are goalies.
Sure.
I think there's 1 defenseman, and I think that defenseman's actually a Philadelphia defenseman. I don't remember completely, but I know that there's been at least 6. Right.
Okay.
Now I know at one time there were 4, but there have been 2 others. I think the Ducks goalie did it once. One of the Ducks goalies did it once.
Oh, okay.
And I want to say another defenseman did it once. But I could be wrong on that. So it's 5 or 6. Here's another good question. Ryan Green, who's out in California, wants to know your favorite Blues decade.
I would probably have to say the 80s, because you had, well, first of all, you had 80-81, which was their first really breakout season since they came into being, and they battled the Islanders down the stretch for the overall points leadership, and then kind of flamed out after that. But that was a fun year. I was away at college at that time, and I couldn't wait to any opportunity I could to see him on TV, which wasn't much. I longed for it and couldn't wait to read the paper the next day to find out what they did. No internet. But
Sportsline on the phone, right? You remember dialing the 1-800 number to get the sports scores in that on the phone?
Well, I will give you a little peek inside the behind the curtain, that back in the late 80s, early 90s, when we needed to get a score updated, that's how we would do it. We would have interns who would be on the phone. We might have a score or 2 that was still outstanding or whatever, and they would be calling every 2 minutes or whatever to see if the score had changed or not, to make sure that we had the most current score of the game on our air. So
yeah, I'm getting my buddy Sam, who's being a funny guy, talking about goalies. You forgot about Blues legend Marty Brodeur.
Very good point.
Well,
so anyway, but
go ahead.
The 80s, the 80s were a fun decade because you had the Harry Ornest era there as well. And I can't tell you how many times the phone would ring in the sports office, and one of us would answer the phone, and it would be Harry Ornest calling to talk to Mike. And Mike always did a sort of a great impression of Harry Ornest. Mike, we're playing the Maple Leafs tomorrow night. Great tickets still available. Would love to be able to get a mention. Well, of course, Harry, so. And we did I went back and dug in the archives to when Mrs. Ornest changed the uniforms and had the blues across the top, and sort of minimized the blue note. And she thought that was a great fashion statement, and we're trying to, I'm trying to choke back, throwing up, because to me, what's the point of putting blues across the top of the jersey? You see the blue note, they're the Blues, right?
No, actually, for me, that's not one of my bad ones. I'm okay with that one. There's a few other ones. Well, let's get with it. What's your favorite jersey that the Blues have had?
Oh, I would say probably the either the late '90s, white jerseys with the navy pants, or the I'd go back to the original days where they had it wasn't quite the the light blue that they had at the Winter Classic, but it wasn't quite a dark blue either. It was sort of in between that would have been in the early 70s, I think. Really loved that sweater. Yeah, maybe a little darker, but yeah.
Pretty close to that.
That's pretty close to that, right?
What about you, Ashley? What's your favorite jersey?
I have to agree with the late 90s, the white one that he described. I really enjoyed that. But that was also around the time I came in. So, I mean, like, my favorite goalie is Grant Fuhr because he was the first goalie I saw.
Yeah, I get that. I actually have so many. I have some Filipino knockoffs of that jersey that I got when I was active duty, down in the Philippines. You can get anything made. So I have some of those they're bad. I'll wear them every now and then just because of what they are. For me, I'm sorry. I'm one of the few people. I like the retro, the 90s retro, the one that Gretzky and Hull wore. And to me, it's just the fact that they wore it that elevates it.
That's very true. Yeah, I just had a hard time with with red being on a uniform that was for a team called the Blues. Just didn't work for me.
That's one of them where. So for me, and this is my argument for that. I never see it as the color red because the blue wasn't the color; it was the music. And second of all, there's so much symbolism in that jersey. The lines on the bottom of it are the musical staffs. You've got the trumpet on it. There's so much symbolism. I know I can't find this, but I remember hearing it that the red was supposed to come from the St. Louis flag, that it was a connection to the flag.
Yeah, I probably couldn't document that for you or find documentation of it, but that sounds about right. I do remember you brought up an interesting point when the Blues were first coming into being. We found a film clip of fans back in the day being interviewed out on the street, asking what they thought of the team's name, and most of the people thought it wasn't strong enough. One guy actually said that they should be called the St. Louis Mules. But I remember seeing a clip when Sid Solomon III talked about it, and he said that I guess maybe the Jim Cullen, the team's attorney, may have mentioned, well, what about the St. Louis Blues? So the only problem with that, would be that we would probably be up for a lawsuit from the Handy family that wrote the St. Louis Blues. And Mr. Solomon Jr., Sid Solomon Jr., said, well, that's even more reason to name them the St. Louis Blues. Let's do it.
I love the name. I've always loved the name. And not only that, to me, it has fit so well for this team through 50-something years of heartbreak and misery and not winning the cup and thinking you were going to win it or this happened or that happened. It was right. It's the right name for me.
I would agree with you. Yeah.
I see another good question. Sam asks, is there a better comeback in NHL history than the Blues coming back from 5-0 down to the Leafs in 2000? Or is that the best comeback ever except for the whole cup run?
There was a playoff game. We talked about Wayne Gretzky earlier. I think it was the Edmonton and the LA Kings. And the Kings came back and won in the playoffs in overtime. Gosh, Darrell Evans, maybe something like that, scored the winning goal. And I can't remember if it made it a 6-5 win, like the Blues came back and did, or came back and won, or if it was 5-4. But it was a pretty significant comeback too that night, as I recall. But I remember watching that game on TV, and after 2 periods, I was ready to move on to something else and start getting the rest of the night's sports together. And all of a sudden, then it's 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, and that got my attention. And I think when it was 5-4, oh, they're going to win this, and boy, they sure did.
I don't know. I think that the recent one with O'Reilly and Kyrou, after as bad as that game was going. Not getting any calls, not being able, couldn't buy it. I mean, they even said it on the telecast. They couldn't buy a goal, right? Couldn't buy a goal. But
Right.
this is something that I believe, and maybe you agree with me. You make your own puck luck, and that's what they
Yes.
did that night.
Yes, that's very true. You don't stop until that until that final horn goes off, and they certainly didn't that night. That's for sure.
Right. Let's see. A question for you. Some of the greatest players in Blues history that wore that jersey. No, I don't think that's a question.
It was a
I
statement.
think he's talking about the 90s jersey that I was talking about. The Monday Night Miracle in Calgary, the one that I said was only the 11th time that it's happened in NHL history. And it like destroyed the Blues record. I think the latest that the Blues had come back from losing in the third was like 4 minutes or something. Right? I mean, this one destroyed it.
I can tell you a little backstory from the show that we did a few years ago. Talked to Susie Matthew, the longtime Blues PR lady.
Yes.
Wonderful lady.
I would love to talk to her. I would so love to talk to her.
Yeah, she's got a lot of history of her own. But after Doug Wickenheiser scored the goal that night, ESPN broadcast that game, as well as I think it was on KDNL here locally. But after the game, of course, everybody's screaming, "We want this guy! We want this guy!" Well, ESPN being the network, they got first dibs. They wanted Doug Wickenheiser, and Jim Kelly, who was a longtime guy on CBS Radio Sports before coming to ESPN. He was the reporter downstairs, and so as he's waiting for Wickenheiser to show up, Susie Matthews standing at the door of the locker room. We need Doug, and we need his jersey. Well, he'd already taken it off and put it into the laundry hamper to be washed with the rest of the jerseys that night. So time was kind of short, and so she told the equipment guy, "Just get me a jersey." So so Doug put on the jersey. Well, it was Mark Hunter's jersey, and so confusion began at that point because twice on the air, Jim Kelly referred to him as Doug Hunter, and Tom Mees, the late Tom Mees, was back in the studio, and he said, "We want to thank Mark Hunter for joining us." So they totally botched that.
That's the beauty of broadcasting.
Yes,
that's the beauty of I'm trying to become a broadcaster or a journalist. That's what my goal is, even at my advanced age. But it's the beauty of it because the things that you get to see and write about and talk about, it has its own beauty.
Well, as we've often said, and I can remember hearing that, way back to the days when I first started, was that's live television for you, and it's true. You never know what to expect at times. So.
Here's a good question for you. Do the two shortened NHL seasons due to COVID ruin Ovechkin's chance of beating Blues legend Gretzky's goal record, or do you think he's going to get it?
I don't have. I certainly wouldn't count him out. I think that's going to be a huge motivator for him. So I think that's going to keep him playing, going to keep him sharp, going to keep him focused. So, barring like an entire season getting canceled, I wouldn't put it past it.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to take second this season, but he's going to be right there. Right?
Aww.
Cat in the house.
Yes, it is. This is the schmoo. Oh, he's camera shy.
the beauty of live television.
Exactly. There
we missed another question. Ryan Green asked, did Gretzky come to St. Louis to bring in fans for the city and possibly give the Blues a name in the league to stand out?
Well, I think at that point, Mike Keenan was the head coach, and he's not really looked upon, favorably as the history has passed us by. But he was collecting talent, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fuhr, Hull, McInnes, and that they had. He even brought Glenn Anderson, and guys like that. I think, for years, Brett Hull had to play with guys like, with no offense to them, but, Bob Basson and the Sutter brothers and, and so on and so forth. This was the opportunity to get Hull to play with a top line, top tier center who would elevate the game and certainly elevate Hull's play even further. And as we know, it just didn't happen that way.
Well, something that another anniversary that just passed was the anniversary of Adam Oates, the jersey behind me, saying, trade me, I'm done, right? What do you remember from that?
I remember that it was sort of it was becoming sort of a recurring thing. That was the third time he wanted his contract renegotiated in a little less than 2 years, if I recall. And the Blues did it a couple of times, but then this third time it struck the wrong nerve, and the Blues just were not going to do it. And so the All-Star game that year, here we go again, was in Philadelphia, and Trey Wingo came back, or was out at the airport when they came back in. And Adam was, so I want to talk to Mr. Shanahan, Mike Shanahan, the owner at the time, Mr. Quinn and Mr. Curran, and, he started giving out ultimatums. Well, it wasn't, I think the next home game after that, every time he touched the puck, he got booed. When his name was announced, he got booed. So the fans had pretty much said what the Blues were saying, that enough was enough. And it was starting to get it was starting to get kind of polluted, if you wanted the air, just because everybody, as great a player as he was, it was a little bit too much to ask to keep getting his contract renegotiated.
Yeah, I understood that. For me, when that one, for me, that's really like, I remember the book Blues Fire. I have a copy somewhere. I think it was one of. I think it was a KMOV reporter that wrote it, who went with the Blues, who did a beat with the Blues that year. And he talked about how CBS was really like sympathetic to him. For me, the issue for him was, look, I'm doing this. This is what numbers I'm putting up every night. He got his, and then the next season you would come in and pay these guys that weren't going to come close to me a lot more than me. I thought he had a case, but he just did it wrong.
Well, he needed you defending him then, in talking to management, because he pretty much wore out his welcome. I think about the only person maybe in St. Louis who was not against him being traded was Brett Hull, and we have a classic piece of video of reporter and cameras at one end of the Blues locker room, and Hull kind of started to walk out the back door of the locker room where the media wasn't allowed, and the reporter who wrote the book, I think you might have been Dave Simons, who was with Channel 4.
I think so.
And I believe it was Dave who kind of called out, "Hey, Brett, can we talk to you for a second?" And this was, of course, after the trade was announced. And Hull didn't even turn around. You could just, he just shouted out as he's walking out the door, "Nope, I don't want to get in trouble."
His one-liners, man, they were sharp. They were sharp. I still believe this, and I've said this on the show a few times. I've talked to some of the fans about it. If Oates stays in St. Louis, Ovi's chasing Hull, not Gretzky.
I would agree with that, because again, Hull didn't really have that top line center who could feed him, and the days of the 86, the 70, 86, and 72 goal seasons were, didn't happen again. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it probably does happen.
Right. Okay. So let's get to some more questions, if you don't mind.
Sam asked, has there been a better D-man pairing than McKinnis and Pronger in Blues history, and where do they rank in the NHL?
Boy, no, there's never been a better combination than McKinnis and Pronger, certainly in St. Louis, and they were fun to watch. Talked to the Blues one year for my son's birthday and got him an autographed Al McInnes stick to give to him as a birthday present. And he was my favorite. I thought Al was just the greatest. But then you had Chris Pronger, who, when you're in a company with you and Bobby Orr, that's pretty good company to be in. Mm-hmm. Winning the Norris Trophy and the MVP trophy in the same year. Pronger could just smother anybody, in front of the net, and just he could keep you out. He could keep you out to the blue line if you wanted to. He was really good, and of course he could also score too. So, that they were fun to watch, and off the top of my head, I can't think of a better defensive pairing than those two.
I'd absolutely agree.
And then Chris Lambert asks, what inspired you to become a sports writer and historian?
Well, the short answer would be the old adage of you do what you love and you never have to work a day in your life. That's pretty much it. My brain started accumulating sports facts and trivia and so on and so forth at a pretty young age. My mom passed away when I was pretty young. And she was the sports fan of the family. My father could care less. I don't think he ever even looked at a TV screen if I had a game on. Just not interested. So I did that. I became a sport nut, I think was the term he used for me, in spite of him. And it just fed off of itself. And so I always had the thought that I would become the next Bob Costas, and host Sports Open Line on KMOX. Well, I wonder how many people said that in their time.
I hate to stop you, but I just want you to know, because when you bring that up, that's what this show is modeled after. Right? I have said, because I remember so much of when Sports Open Line was really a Sports Open Line. I remember laying in my bed with one of them little old AM radios, right? Long desk type radios with the dials on it, putting it to KMOX and listening to Sports Open Line. That's what got me doing this. I used to do a studio style show, like what you did with the video, and I've morphed into this because I miss that. Being able to call in and talk about what you see. That's why we do the pregame and postgame and intermission shows. So fans, not a lot know about it, but fans have a place to come and voice their opinions about the game. And I always say that your opinion is just as important as mine.
Absolutely. I can still remember it to this day, whoever the host was. 436-7900 if you're calling in St. Louis. Enterprise 9808 outside of the St. Louis area. So yeah, I started listening to that religiously at a pretty young age, and
10 to midnight every night.
Right. Yes. And my father got me a transistor radio for Christmas one year, and he kind of looked at me, with a raised eyebrow, when I would always, Dad, I need a new battery for my radio, because I'd fall asleep with the radio on. And, I had to be in bed, at 9 or 9:30 when stuff was still going on. So I'd sneak the radio under my pillow and listen until I fell asleep. So yeah, radio was it for me back in those days.
Sam Mazzella said that if Lemieux didn't get sick, Ovi would have been chasing him instead. Possible, but I think that Hull would have just put up. I think Hull could have easily gotten to 1,000 goals.
Right? I think that's entirely possible. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
He's the only other player than Gretzky that's ever scored more than a goal a game.
That's right. And it's funny because we talked about it in the sports office all the time that back in those days, if you had a ticket for a Blues game that night, you could pretty much bank on getting to see Brett Hull score a goal. That was exciting. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was, and I've seen so many of them in my life. Unfortunately, when he really came into play was my Navy days when I was in the service. So I didn't get, but anytime that I could get to a game, just to see him play, your eyes would just go wide. I saw him score a game-tying goal in the last minute of the game with the goalie pulled. against the Blackhawks. I was in the arena, in the Checker Dome, right behind the goal, second level. You know, the old second level there with the beat up seats, right?
Sure.
What do you call it? The like folding seats, right?
Yes.
Being in there and seeing that, and just the electricity that he brought every night.
There was a game in Buffalo that I can still remember, and this is when Adam Oates was still with the team, and gosh, I can't remember if it was how late in the game it was, or maybe it was overtime or whatever. And you know, the announcers were talking about that Oates is going to take this face-off. He's going to get the puck to Hull right off the face-off, and he's going to, and Brett's going to get a shot. And that is exactly how it played out. Oates got the face-off, and back to Hull, and Hull ripped the shot, and that was the ball game.
Oh, Oates was probably next to O'Reilly the best centerman, face-off wise, that the Blues have seen. Right?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. Adam did all the little things right.
Yeah.
Except play the political game, of course.
That was the unfortunate. Here's a good question from Chris. Which building was greater, the Checker Dome or the Big E?
While being an old timer, I guess I would have to say the arena, because on a Saturday night when the Blackhawks were in town, for example, you could literally feel the building shake. It was so much fun.
I wish I could find this video. Maybe you know where that video is. ESPN, when they were doing games before the arena went down, remember when the wave was going big through the late 80s, early 90s? They took a camera, like above, and had outlined the building, right? And you could see the building moving around the outline, right? And that building, the roar of it, the crowd. Even I've had times where I had the limited view seats. I didn't care. I just stuck like this and was in. I could feel that the I-beam moving around. It was amazing.
Yes, and the old press box, the way the building was configured, it was really kind of, if you got up in that press box, you literally could look out over that press box, and if you weren't careful, you would wind up on the ice.
Yep. You had to climb up to it, right? You had a ladder.
Yeah,
right? You had to climb a ladder.
Yes, it was, and not only that, but you had, it was such a small space. You had 3 rows, I think it was, with, and you'd have to take steps to get up there. And I mean, there was just very limited space, and it just made it. It was a great building. I just can't put it quite into words, but it was a fun building to be in.
In the days before Hull, you could have probably got a seat in the press box without even calling game day, and hey, I want to cover the game today. Can I get a press pass? Susie would have gladly given you one. But once Hull got there, and Oates got there, forget that, right? Yes. Because it was electrifying in the city, right?
The
campaigns they did.
Yes,
right?
It really was. And remember that when they tore down the old Kiel Auditorium, it was Brett Hull to shoot a slap shot into the old parking garages that set off the fireworks and the demolition to get the Enterprise Center built.
Yeah, now I'm so glad you say that, because we've had a conversation about that. I've always said that there was a Kiel Center before this one. I've been told, no, I don't think so. There was a Kiel Center before this one, correct?
Well, it was called Kiel Auditorium, and it was named after a long ago St. Louis mayor, Mayor Kiel, and yes, it was, and that's where the old St. Louis Hawks played basketball.
Yep.
And so yes, there was a predecessor to the old Kiel Center.
I remember Bob Costas talking about the Hawks playing there. And maybe it was the St. Louis Spirits too, but it was
Spirits
like
played at the arena.
Oh, they played at the arena. Okay,
Spirits
well the Hawks did. It was like an open air. You could see out the ends of the arena at the time. You could see out the ends of it, and you could feel the wind. Like guys would take shots and have to make sure that the wind wasn't blowing that hard. I remember those days.
Yeah,
right?
Well, of course, the other thing you remember about the arena was for a very long time, the building didn't have air conditioning. So if you got into the month of May or whatever, you had to be really careful because the ice would get really sloppy.
Yeah. I know they ended up putting air conditioning in the building. I want to say in like 88, 89, somewhere around there.
That sounds about right, I think.
Because I remember going to games and you walked in and it was a great smell before, but once they got the AC in there, you walked in and the smell of the ice. I've talked about this so many times. It just smacked you right in the face, and it wasn't a bad smell. It was a good smell. You know what I'm talking about, right, Andy?
I do. Sure, absolutely. Right? There were smells, all right, before they put the air conditioning in there, but it wasn't necessarily the ice, I don't think.
No. Probably, well, after the game it wasn't. Before the game it was, but after the game it wasn't. God, wow, what a quick hour this was. I don't want to end it, but I know I promised you an hour. Tell us a little bit. Normally I ask questions about you, but I didn't get a chance to do that. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, where you went to high school, all those fun things.
That's the ultimate St. Louis question. Where did you go?
I'm a St. Louis boy.
Well, there you go. You can take St. Louis and out of St. Louis, but you can't take St. Louis out of it. Right?
Nope.
I grew up over in Illinois, a town called Alton. And so not too far from St. Louis, and so got to make a lot of trips over to Busch Stadium and to the arena. I saw a lot of St. Louis Billikens hockey because that was a cheaper ticket than the Blues. Even when they weren't playing as well in the decade of the 70s. But it was a great place to grow up, and as I said, I've had a love of sports from early on, but I had, as I said, I kind of had the brain to accumulate largely useless information for a long time. I knew the presidents backwards and forwards and when their terms of office were and so on and so forth before I started school. As a kindergartner, I was reading to the first grade class. And that was probably the peak of my career, of my life. It was all downhill after that. But went to college at Illinois State up in Normal, and I wound up at KSDK very fortunately. Maybe about 3 or 4 months after I got out of college. And worked as a non-paid person for a year, and then started doing the weekends, working with Art Holiday. And
I remember Art.
And then moved up to the weekday job, and I've been sort of building off of that ever since. I've never really felt a need to leave, and so I've just kind of been there for the long haul. I'll be the last one in the building to turn the lights out, I think.
Yeah, I remember, and I can't think of his name. You're going to come off right away. There was a KSDK news anchor. He started as a stagehand. His joke was, the first thing I ever did on TV was clean up dog poop. You know what I'm talking about?
That may have been before my time.
Oh, he was still there. He was still there when you were there. He would have been the main, he was with KSDK, and, well, actually, it might have been KMOX. I might have gotten that wrong. But he's been in St. Louis staple for forever.
Well, I can tell you that Karen Foss started off as a, I believe she'd gotten herself a job as a secretary at the station, and worked her way, and I mean worked her way into, she was the queen of St. Louis television, and there was nobody better. I remember those days. And no better person than Karen Foss. She was terrific. She's very nice to me.
Yeah, and I hate to ask this because I haven't lived in St. Louis since 1987. Is she still around, or is she passed?
No, she's still. Actually, she was just in town in December. She lives now in New Mexico, where she has taken up art and painting, and she married a gallery owner there in Albuquerque, I believe. But she was back in St. Louis and had a showing of some of her work.
Oh, that would have been cool to go to.
Yeah, And you know, she looks great for, you know, I know she's older than I am, and I mean, she still looks fabulous.
Yeah, I remember there was Karen Foss, there was Larry Connors, and then I cannot remember the third one, but they were iconic. They'd been there forever. Right.
Right. Oh, Julius Hunter probably is. Maybe
No, it wasn't Hunter. I remember
no?
Hunter. This was a white guy. Actually, you look like him.
Oh, Dick Ford?
Might be, yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it, Dick Ford.
Okay, well, you know,
at least in my memory you do, so don't take it the wrong way.
Well, I hope Dick's not watching, because I'm sure he would be insulted, but
I doubt that. I doubt that. I doubt that at all. Andy, thank you so much tonight, man.
You're welcome.
Normally we get these and you're like struggling to get through the hour sometimes. Tonight flew by. I don't think I've ever heard Slapshot so quiet.
I was really enjoying it, though. He has a lot of great things to say, and I'm just taking it in.
Right.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you both. I really enjoyed the show.
Yeah, well, thank you, and stick around. I want to talk to you after we go away, guys. Thank you so much. Remember, tomorrow night we are on an hour before, or half an hour before game time. I think it's a 7 o'clock game start, so 6:30 Central Standard Time. And then we'll be there for the intermissions and the post game. This is Guy, the Hawaii Blues fan, for Ashley Slapshot Jones and Andy Mohler of KSDK, saying aloha, mahalo, and you absolutely, positively know the three of us are bleeding blue with you. Aloha.